I'm here to talk about the budget constraint. The budget constraint represents the points where the consumer is spending all of their income. A consumer wants to buy Coke and popcorn, but only has $1,000 to spend on just those two goods. The $1,000 the consumer can spend is their budget constraint. To graph the budget constraint, consider this. Given the $1,000, if Coke costs $2 and popcorn costs $10, the consumer can buy 500 cans of Coke, as seen here, or they can buy 100 bags of popcorn, as seen here on the x-axis. The slope of the budget constraint is the rate at which the market is willing to trade one good for another. In this example, since the price of Coke is $2 and the consumer has $1,000 to spend, and popcorn costs $10 and they have $1,000 to spend, then they can trade 5 cans of Coke for 1 bag of popcorn, making the slope 5/1. The consumer can afford anything on or below the budget constraint, but below, even though she can afford to buy these goods, she's not spending all of her income. And above the budget constraint, the consumer can afford those.
So now we're going to talk about what the consumer wants. Utility is an abstract measure of the happiness that a consumer receives from a bundle of goods. If two consumption bundles make a consumer equally happy, as in they give the same utility, the consumer is said to be indifferent between them. An indifference curve shows the various bundles of consumption that makes the consumer equally happy, so they yield the same utility. The indifference curve is the rate at which the customer is willing to substitute one good for the other. The rate is called the marginal rate of substitution, which is also the slope. So in this example, it is how much Coke the consumer requires to be compensated for 1 unit reduction in a bag of popcorn. So the properties of indifference curves are that higher indifference curves are preferred to lower ones. So in this case, the indifference curve up here is preferred to the one down here. And also, so that's because people prefer to consume more than less. Indifference curves are also downward sloping if the consumer likes both goods. Indifference curves don't cross. And
dimes, for example, are perfect substitutes, and the indifference curves are straight lines. This is because for every 2 nickels, you get 1 dime. Left and right shoes are perfect complements. You need complete pairs. So if you have 5 right shoes and 10 left shoes, you still can only make 5 pairs. On the next curve, at point A, you cannot afford this since it is above the budget constraint. At point B, you can do better since it is below your budget constraint. So you need to find the indifference curve, which is tangent to the budget constraint. The tangency point is the optimum. At the consumer's optimum, the slope of the indifference curve equals the slope of the budget constraint. And the customer's relative valuation of the goods is equal to the market's relative valuation of the goods. It's important to make sure because every dollar counts. The marginal utility of a good is the increase in happiness a consumer gets from an extra unit of that good. So if the next bag of popcorn gave twice the utility of the next Coke, then you would trade off 2 Cokes for a bag of popcorn, and the marginal rate of substitution would be 2. So at the optimum, the marginal utility per money spent on a bag of popcorn must equal the marginal utility per money spent on Coke.
There are 2 different kinds of goods, normal and inferior. Normal goods are products that consumers buy more of when their income increases. For example, if a consumer's income increases, they will buy a name brand product rather than a store brand product. Inferior goods are products that consumers buy more of when their income decreases. Ramen noodles are an example of an inferior good. The income effect is when your income changes and you can afford to buy less or more of a certain good. This is when your optimal consumption bundle moves in difference curves. So from point C to point A. The substitution effect is when one good becomes cheaper so you can afford more of another. This is when your optimal consumption bundle moves along the indifference curve. So from point C to point B.
So this is an example of a given good. The price of potatoes rises from $1 to $2, and the budget constraint changes because of this. And this makes consumers poorer. Since potatoes are an inferior good, consumers buy more as income falls, and this demonstrates the income effect. Potatoes now are more expensive than before, so consumers decide to switch to meat, the substitution effect. Since this is a given good, the income effect dominates the substitution effect. Normal demand curves are downward sloping, but for given goods, the demand curve is upward sloping as seen in the second graph. A given good is a good that people consume more of as the price rises and consume less of as price decreases. For example, as we saw before, the price of potatoes rose from $1 to $2, the budget constraint shifted, and consumers became poorer. And this is an example of given goods.
Money, 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 must be funny.